Hi, it's Nikki here from Happy Hormones for Life, and today I'm delighted to have Sarah Rusbatch with us, all the way from Perth, Australia. We've managed to find a time that links, and she is a grey area drinking coach, and I'm fascinated with this. Of course, going through midlife, a lot of us women are struggling with the after effects, maybe of feeling after a drink and wondering whether it really fits into our midlife strategy these days. So I'm really excited to get deeper into this topic. Sarah, welcome to the podcast. And can we just start off before we get into your story? Can you tell us what grey area drinking is and how do we know we have a problem with it?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. So thank you for having me. Grey area drinking is a really helpful term because when I was drinking, I didn't identify as being an alcoholic. Most of us think that the old-fashioned way of describing someone's alcohol use was you're an alcoholic or you're not. And if you're anything like me, I think your listeners are probably similar age. I'm 47, and I grew up with my idea of an alcoholic was either Sue Ellen in Dallas or Ange, who was married to Dirty Den in EastEnders. And they were these like down and out women that just sat in their 90s all day, glugging straight from the bottle, crying, and their life was over. And that wasn't me. That wasn't what I did. And so therefore I was like, well, I'm clearly not an alcoholic. I don't drink in the morning. I don't drink every day. I don't wake with trembling hands needing to have a drink. And in actual fact, what the medical world don't even use the term alcoholic anymore. They use alcohol use disorder. And this can be mild, moderate, or severe, because it's not that one day you're a social drinker and one day you're an alcoholic. It's not that there's a threshold or a number that means when you cross over, that's what you become. And I think just alcohol use disorder can be a really helpful term to start to think, well, where would I be on that scale? A great way of thinking about grey area drinking is if you've got a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is someone who doesn't drink or maybe has a glass of champagne at a wedding once a year, and that's their alcohol use. And 10 is your Sue Ellen, so someone who's waking in the morning, needs to have a drink and needs to have medical support to actually withdraw safely from alcohol, because alcohol is one of only 3 substances that the human body can die from withdrawal from if it's not managed correctly. And just on that, the other 2, one's heroin, which is illegal, and one's OxyContin, which is the prescribed drug that you can only get from a doctor as a prescription in measured quantities at any one time. And yet alcohol was listed as an essential service during lockdown. And so, you know, the way that we perceive alcohol in society, we have it in a different category to many things. So you've got a 1 and a 10 on that scale. And grey area drinking to me is between about a 4 to an 8. So you've got past the point of take it or leave it drinking. You're using alcohol for something, but you're not at the point where you're physically dependent. You're not at the point where you need to drink every day. And you're not at the point where you can't stop for a couple of days if you wanted to. So you're somewhere in that middle, that grey area, and that's grey area drinking. And I think you mentioned, like, how would someone know if they fall into that category? So a couple of, there's a checklist on my website, but a couple of points to think about are, do I always or often drink more than I intend to? So do I go, oh, I'm just going to have 1 or 2 tonight, and then it always ends up being a lot more? Do I make rules around my drinking, but then often break them? So I have lots of rules. I don't drink on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I don't drink before 5 o'clock. I don't drink white wine on an empty stomach. I don't drink at lunchtime at the weekend unless I'm out with the girls. There was all these rules, but then it was like, oh, I know I don't drink on a Wednesday, but well, I could just have one because I've had a really hard day and I really deserve it. So there was all this chatter that went on in my head all the time about the rules and then justifying a reason to break those rules. You're smiling a lot as I say this, so I don't know.
Because I'm literally ticking off a checklist of my own here, so carry on.
Yeah. A couple of other signs might be you're silently worrying about your drinking. So you might not say it to anyone, but inside you might be thinking, oh, am I drinking too much? Like, it's not serving me anymore. It's always leaving me feeling really rough the next day, but why do I still keep doing it when I know how it makes me feel? So maybe on the outside, no one thinks there's any kind of issue, but we're starting to question our relationship with it. It might be that we're starting to notice it's taking more than it's giving. And this was definitely, we'll get into this, but this was the case for me, was once I got to 40, my hangovers just became so much worse, the impact on my anxiety, the impact on my sleep, just all of those things. And so even though it was making me feel wretched and it was making me feel terrible, I still kept doing it. And it was like it had this hold over me. But like I said, I didn't drink every day and I didn't drink in the morning. So therefore I was like, well, what am I? What I'm not an alcoholic. So where do I go to get help? It didn't feel right to me to go into a church basement and stand up there and say, hi, I'm Sarah, I'm an alcoholic, because that wasn't me. But at the same time, I knew I was drinking well above the recommended units. And I knew that I was at a point where alcohol was taking way more than it was giving. So maybe that's just for some of your listeners or for yourself to just reflect on.
Absolutely. And I think it's very different in our 40s and 50s because the body's obviously can't handle it like we used to. And the rewards seem so much more when we were younger. But to me, the rewards these days are sort of actually less than the cost. And I was going to ask you, actually, what was your drinking costing you in your life? What was that?
Yeah. And so, like you say, it started off 90% fun, 10% a bit rubbish, but nothing that a Diet Coke and packet of crisps wouldn't sort out the next morning. And then, I started drinking at 14. I grew up in the north of England. That was just very normal. We would just fill up SodaStream bottles with whatever we could find in our parents' drinks cabinet. We'd go down the local park. We'd drink these disgusting concoctions of all these terrible drinks. And then someone would find some cider and someone would find some like Mad Dog 2020. And we would like scull these drinks. Usually someone would end up vomiting, someone would end up snogging one of the local boys from the park around the corner, and then you'd go home, throw up, and do it all again the next weekend. And that was like,
sounds like my friend.
Yeah, like that was just the like the early 90s in the UK was, I'm sure it was happening in parks across Britain, right?
Yeah.
And then I discovered, and I loved what I discovered about alcohol from a very early age. I really liked how it made me feel. I was one of those people that got lit up quite a lot. And there's a lot of research now that shows that some people will get really lit up by alcohol and others won't. And you can pretty much put a group of like late teenagers, early 20s in a room and watch them all get pissed. And then you can spot which ones might be more likely to go on to develop alcohol use disorder, because they're the ones that get really lit up by alcohol. Like I had a couple of friends that after a few drinks are like, oh God, I'm tired, I just want a water now. Whereas me, I was like, oh, I am just getting started, girlfriend. What do you mean you want a water? And so perhaps the writing was on the wall from quite an early stage. And then fast forward, going to uni, we all know what uni in the UK is like for Freshers Week and alcohol and everything. And then I moved to London. My first job was in recruitment, and it was my fourth interview was in the pub doing shots of Sambuca to see how well I could handle my booze. Needless to say, I passed with flying colours. And this was this was the era of the Spice Girls and Sex and the City, and girls could do it all, and we could all channel our inner Samantha and drink cocktails around the rooftop bars of London, and pick up a bloke here and there, and girl power, and all of those things. And we were kind of like living this idea that we could match the boys drink for drink. We could do all of those things. We were earning our own money. And so that kind of fed that narrative for me, that we had, lots of female role models at the time were drinking heavily and really kind of waxing lyrical about that partying lifestyle. Then I went traveling, I did all sorts. And so for me, alcohol had been present all my life, but it had always been a social fun thing. I just was like, yeah, I'm a very social fun person. So therefore alcohol featured quite heavily, but it wasn't that I was using alcohol. Looking back, it wasn't a crutch or anything. Whereas what happened for me was I met my husband, we got married, we had a baby, and we decided to move to Australia. And then I fell pregnant again very quickly soon after. And very soon I had 2 babies under 2. I had no friends, I had no family, I had no job. Like I'd had a very successful career in London, and now all of a sudden I was at home in this strange city, in this strange home, pureeing carrot, cleaning baby sick, going to monkey music. And I was so lonely, Nikki. I was so homesick. I was so lost of my identity of who was I, like this woman that used to like wine and dine in the best restaurants in London and had this incredible circle of girlfriends and was always out doing things, and I just didn't know who I was anymore. And alcohol was like oh, pick me, I'll make you feel better.
To your friend.
And,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, because it does in the moment, it
Mm,
makes all those horrible feelings go away.
mm,
And so it was a very slow, steady kind of like, oh, when I have a glass of wine, everything goes a little bit fuzzy and feels a little bit better. So I wasn't drinking when I was with the kids. My husband would get home, and then I was starting to think more and more, oh, what time is he going to be home? 5 o'clock. Let's make sure I've got the wine chilling. You know, and my thoughts became preoccupied with making sure that the wine was cold for when he got home from work, so I could pour my first glass of wine. And oh, but it's Monday. I said I wasn't going to drink on a Monday. I could just have one. And then the thing with alcohol is we build tolerance to it. So therefore we need more to get that same buzz. I don't just want one anymore. I want two, I want three. And this started happening. And then gradually, by the time I got to my 40s, the wheels started to really come off for me in terms of like my mental health and the anxiety I was getting every time I was drinking. Every time I drank, I would wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with that, you know, the heart palpitations and felt really anxious. I was tired, I was lethargic, I was putting on weight, I had spots on my skin all the time. Like I just felt like I was losing myself. And I went to see my GP, and at no point did she ask me how much I was drinking. It just didn't even come up in the conversation. She gave me a prescription for anti-anxiety meds and sent me on my way. And this was in early 2017. But I knew that wasn't the problem. Deep down, I knew that I was drinking way too much. And so I decided I'm just going to do 21 days off. I'll take a break. And so I did that 21 days and I felt amazing. I was like, oh, this is what it's like to wake up having had 8 hours of solid sleep and not waking up in a pool of sweat at 2 a.m. And this is what it's like to feel positive and actually to like myself in the morning, because I'm not looking at myself in the mirror going, oh, you loser, you said you weren't going to drink last night, and there you go again, you drank more than you intended. Like the self-talk started to improve and increase. And so I started feeling more positive, more happy. I was more present with the kids. Everything started to feel better. And so I kept going. I got to the 21 days and I was like, well, why would I stop? And so I got to 100 days. And then, you know, the novelty wore off a little bit. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, I can't never drink again. That would just be weird. I'm Sarah, the party girl. But I thought, oh, I've done 100 days. I'll be fixed. Everything's fine. I clearly don't have a problem, because if I had a problem, I wouldn't have been able to take 100 days off, right? Because Sue Ellen couldn't have done 100 days. And so therefore she had the problem and I didn't. So I thought I'll go back to drinking, and now I'll be a normal, moderate drinker. And within 2 weeks, I was back to drinking the same amount as before.
no,
And
really?
that's
What,
how
what
the
is
brain remembers.
you saying that, you know, you hadn't 100 days wasn't enough to change those kind of neural pathways, and you hadn't kind of, you know, you still had something that you were needing from the alcohol. What was that? Was it just social pressure?
No, I think that your neural path, like Dr. Professor Nutt says, your neural pathways will never change in that way when you pick up a drink again. So if you're a 6 out of 10 on that drinking scale, you could have 3 months off, you could have 2 years off, you could have 5 years off. You don't then restart drinking back at number one. You go right back in where you were before. And there's so many examples I could give you of the thousands of women that I've coached that have taken extended periods of time off alcohol, and then they go back to drinking and they very quickly end up back where they were. And there's a reason. There's neurological reasons for that. There's the neural pathways, there's the associations in our brain, and there's the fact that alcohol is promoted so heavily, it's available everywhere. Like as soon as you kind of said to yourself, oh, well, I could just have one, then the chatter starts again. And then it's like, oh, I know I said I wasn't going to. Whereas when it's completely off the table, it's just like, yeah, I don't think about it, don't want it. And so for me, I went back to drinking, tried for 2 years to moderate, really didn't do very well with that. And finally realized in April 2019 that everything in my life was better without alcohol, everything. And so I was like, why do I keep trying so hard to keep this thing in my life that is actually makes me miserable, disrupts my sleep, takes me away from being the mum I want to be, is affecting my hormones. I've gone to my naturopath. He was like, your estrogen is so high, it's off the chart. And we know that alcohol causes our circulating estrogen to massively increase. Like all of these things were going on. And I was like, I'm never going to be able to moderate, and I don't want to carry on drinking at the level that I am. So at the end, it was just like, I'm done. And so that was my last drink, was the 27th of April, 2019.
Wow. And have you had any temptation to go back? I mean, obviously there's temptation everywhere, isn't there? So how do you stick to it? What's the, I guess, I know you want to feel better. What is that? What changed for you that made you want to do it forever?
A couple of things. So number one, that full, complete knowing in my bones that moderation was miserable, and trying to always fight for moderation was just going to leave me miserable. And actually freedom came from simply taking alcohol away, and then doing the work. Like, the actual work of creating a sober life is 10% removing alcohol and 90% doing the work to create a life that you love so much you don't want to escape it and you don't want to drink. And that's what I've basically done for the last 4.5 years, is invested in myself. I've gone into therapy. I've healed some old wounds. I've added in so much to my life so that I have a full, interesting, fulfilling life. So I don't want to numb or escape my life with alcohol anymore.
Wow. Okay. And that sounds really sensible to me. But how do you? So what are some of the key things that have made a really big difference to you in terms of putting into your life as you've taken the alcohol life? What's replaced that?
So there's been a few things. So I've done a lot of work on the physical. So I did neurotransmitter assessments to see what neurotransmitters am I deficient in, because that will play a big part in your cravings for alcohol. And that's a big part of what I do when I work with clients. So I was deficient in dopamine, and I know that dopamine is something that I have to, keep working on. So for me, my non-negotiables are I exercise every single day, I prioritize my sleep, and I eat really well. And if I'm doing those three things, then my craving for anything that gives a big dopamine hit, whether it's social media, whether it's sugar, whether it's alcohol, whether it's online shopping, whatever it is, the need isn't there because my dopamine is topped up enough through the other things that I'm doing. So it's that. And I'm very deficient in GABA, as most of my female clients are, because as we get older and our progesterone drops, so too does our GABA. And so I work very hard at nervous system regulation. So I take supplements that support GABA production. I have added in meditation. I've added in yoga. So the things that soothe and regulate my nervous system, because stress was a major and is a major cause for drinking for so many people. And so it's building a toolkit of what are the other things I'm doing when I'm stressed, but also what's in my toolkit to prevent me even getting to that point of being so stressed that my only option is to drink.
Right. Yeah. Gosh, that sounds a really, really sensible way of approaching it, and also a sustainable way of approaching it. So we all need to reduce our stress anyway. So it's preventative, isn't it? Not getting to that point where you're so, well, you don't care anymore, so you're going to have that glass. Tell me a little bit about the difference, because you mentioned this before, matching drink for drink, what the men were doing. Tell us why women are different in the way we metabolize alcohol.
Yeah, so there's 3 major reasons why we differ. So number one is a male's body contains more water than a woman's body, simply because women carry more body fat, because we are meant to, physiologically we're designed to grow babies, and so we have less water than a man's body. So matching a man drink for drink, a man's body will dilute more of the alcohol than a woman's body will, because they simply have more water in their system. The second thing is that women contain less of the enzyme ALDH, which is called alcohol dehydrogenase, which is what metabolizes and breaks down alcohol and prevents it from entering our bloodstream. So because we have less of that, more alcohol, if a man and woman were to have the same bottle of wine, more of the alcohol would enter a woman's bloodstream than a man's, because we have less of the enzyme that breaks it down. So this means that women are more prone to liver disease, heart disease, and all of the cancers related to alcohol, because more of the alcohol enters our system. And the thing for women to know is that we have less of this enzyme anyway. And as we age, we have even less of it. It's practically, and that's why our hangovers get so much worse. I did a course recently where I learned that women have shrinking livers. So from our late 30s onwards, our liver volume starts shrinking, which means that we simply cannot metabolize alcohol in the same way. It's actually even in the AA book from the 1930s. There's a little phrase in there that says women become addicted to alcohol faster than men. So like they've known this for a very, very, very long time. So it's not it's actually not safe for women to drink at the levels that men do. And yet I was, fell for that whole thing, I'm girl power, female empowerment, I can drink the boys under the table, all of that. And then the third thing is, for women at different times of the month, alcohol will affect us differently. So when our estrogen is higher, we feel intoxicated quicker. So this is really important for our daughters to know as well. Like when they go out drinking at 17, 18 years old or whatever, there will be some nights that they're going to get drunk really quickly on the same amount of alcohol that 2 weeks ago they might have not felt in any way drunk.
Yeah.
And this is because estrogen, when it's higher circulating in the body, it will make you more intoxicated. And this is why sometimes you can have half a bottle of wine and it just doesn't touch the sides and you feel fine the next day. And then 2 weeks later, you can have half a bottle of wine, have a little bit of blackout, maybe not remember everything and feel absolutely shocking the next day. And this is all to do with our estrogen. And so it's really important for us women to understand that there's so much at play in our body, particularly in these perimenopause years, and how much alcohol impacts all of these different systems when the body's under so much stress anyway, with all of these changes that are going on. When we throw alcohol into the mix, it just plays havoc with so many different systems.
Yeah, and there's the whole blood sugar issue too, isn't there, where it's going to mess with your blood sugar, and we know that as we get through menopause and the blood sugar control is already a challenge. So there's the whole that, and it's not great for your gut either, is it? Do you know much about that?
So alcohol's the number one cause of leaky gut, which again can cause so many other gastric issues. And alcohol like absolutely destroys our gut health because, let's not forget, it's petrol, right? Alcohol is ethanol, it's petrol. And so if we're drinking alcohol really regularly and it's going into our gut, 90% of our serotonin, which is our happy hormone that makes us feel great, is made in the gut. If we've got really poor gut health, we're not making serotonin. So then we feel even worse mentally, but then that leads to us drinking more because we feel so much worse. And so we just end up in this vicious cycle. So there's a brilliant podcast, actually, Andrew Huberman on the Huberman Lab. I don't know if you've listened to any of his podcasts, and he's done a big 2-hour podcast on alcohol and the body. And he says, like, the number one thing he would say for anyone when they're starting to remove alcohol or change their drinking is just start really adding in that fermented food and all of those foods that will really start to repair your gut health.
Yeah, great. And I think supplements, like you've already mentioned, can be really helpful with this whole getting off alcohol too, because alcohol depletes a lot of your nutrients too. So alcohol, you've mentioned this phrase a few times, but alcohol is the only drug we have to justify not taking. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, so we live in a society where alcohol is accepted. Where I am in Australia now, it's the end of school year. So, the number of teachers that are being given bottles of wine for their gift, like, we have to remember it's a class 1 carcinogen. So alcohol is in the same category as tobacco when it comes to how likely it is the risks associated with cancer. And so would we give a teacher a packet of fags for her end of year gift? No, we wouldn't. So again, it's starting to, like, we have a society that promotes, celebrates, accepts alcohol. I've done half marathons where I've been given a beer at the end. I've done yoga classes that have finished with a glass of wine. I've done first birthday parties where I've been given a glass of champagne at 10 o'clock in the morning when I've gone through the door. Like, do you ever go to a wedding, a birthday, a funeral, any kind of Christmas party without alcohol present? It's absolutely everywhere. And yet, if you say you're not drinking, the pressure that we can feel, I would have people say to me, "Oh, you're not drinking. Oh, well, let's catch up when you're drinking again."
Wow, like you've got some kind of illness.
Yeah. You say to someone, oh, I've stopped smoking, and they're like, oh, well done, good on you. And you say you've stopped drinking, and more often than not, it's, oh, don't be so boring, just have one. Because we've just created this myth in our society that alcohol equals fun, and you can't have fun. Like, a life without alcohol is boring. And I can tell you, like, it's anything but.
That is one of the things that goes through my head is what, I like you, I've drunk since my, teenage years, and I cannot imagine a life that is what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, when I think about giving up completely, I've drastically reduced, but when I think I'm going to live a life without it, who would I be? Who would, that person that I, like you said, you used to be the party girl, the bubbly extrovert in the room or whatever, because of the drink. So who are you without that? And that goes through a lot of people's heads. We're so used to the way it makes you feel and the confidence it gives you, that, and the fun. You do have sometimes, when I say a better time, you don't have a better time, but you have a fun time when everybody's around you and you're in a crowd and you're out and everybody's a bit tipsy. It's fun. So how do you replace that feeling of fun when you're not drunk like everybody else? You're the sober one in the room, and everyone thinks you're boring. That's I think that's a little bit of my challenge.
So the first thing I'd say on that is I have a fabulous time going out with my mates while they're drinking and I'm not. Like, it just, if you're with the right people, like if you're bored with the people that are drinking, then maybe you need to change the people you spend time with, right? If you can't go out and have fun with those people and not drink, yeah, I mean, that's a whole other question, right? And that's a whole other topic. But like, so for example, on Saturday night, I went to a Ministry of Sound night, proper 4 hours of hands in the air, raving, dancing like I was 19 again, had the best night, not a single drop of alcohol, and yet was just on the euphoria. Like, humans are designed for connection. So most of us think that when we go out, like, let's just say, you're going to a Christmas party with all your girlfriends and you're drinking cocktails and stuff, we think it's because we've had the cocktail that we feel so great. But humans are built for connection. If you're with people you love, who you love spending time with, you're going to release endorphins in the company of people in an upbeat bar having a great time anyway, with an alcohol-free like espresso martini or an alcohol-free gin and tonic in your hand. The content of your glass doesn't have to make the night more fun. And if it does, there's a few questions there, right? That would be like my argument. Yeah. And the second thing I would say is, like, the identity piece is, yeah, who the hell am I if I don't drink alcohol anymore? And that is the most exciting part of this whole journey, is actually discovering who that person is. Because most of the women I work with, they've been drinking for so long that they don't know that. They discover that actually they're introverts. They've been drinking to give them social confidence, because they actually find big group settings really overwhelming and really exhausting and so you actually get to start to connect to yourself at that much deeper level of going, oh, well, this is what I want to do. And you actually start honoring your own needs of discovering, this is what makes me happy. Actually, I don't like those huge, big situations. I'd much rather do a one-on-one chat with a really close friend and go for a brunch and a walk and a coffee and a yoga class or whatever. Like, you start to discover what you actually love. And I think we live in this mythical idea that fun, the only way to have fun is to go partying, right? Whereas I would argue that fun is anything you do for your own joy and pleasure. So fun can be, I shared before we went live, I get up early. Most mornings I'm up at 5 a.m. I do a sunrise dog walk, catch up with a girlfriend. We've put the world to rights, and I'm home by 6:15 in the morning. The kids are like, those kind of things now just bring my heart so much joy, because it's deep, authentic connection. And it's not just getting pissed in a bar with people, repeating myself, waking up the next day, not remembering what I said, worrying that I said something that sounded stupid, maybe sharing all my secrets with a stranger, which I was very prone to doing after a few wines, and then just like, oh God, what did I say last night? Like, I just get to show up as my most authentic self now, right? And there's nothing boring about that.
No, absolutely. And there's nothing to hide either, is there? So, what do you see with the younger generations coming up? I see a trend of them drinking a little bit less. Is that real?
Mm. Definitely, like evidence is showing that the younger generation are drinking a lot less. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I think we now know the health risks of alcohol. Whereas when you and I were growing up, they just weren't talked about now. And, you know, the only demographic where alcohol use is going up is middle-aged women. Every other demographic, it's going down.
Wow.
Alcohol use disorder, which is defined as 10 or more units of alcohol per week, which is about 8 glasses of wine a week. Alcohol use disorder has increased by 80% in the last 30 years in women. So alcohol use disorder in women has increased by 80% in the last 30 years. And that's middle-aged women. So the younger generation, they're not drinking because they know what it does to you. And I think they all live their lives through social media now, that they don't want to look like, you know, they don't want to perhaps lose so much of that. It's just a different lifestyle. But the problem, the biggest issue is with middle-aged women.
And you can see that actually all over social media, can't you? The memes and the Prosecco clock and all the stuff that, you know, the birthday cards, the amount of cards I get that are about gin or Prosecco.
Totally.
And it is every time I buy or get one, I you know, the first reaction is to think that's a little bit funny, and then you look at the deeper meaning of that and go, wow, okay, I've got, you know, my birthday, I've got 10 cards all about gin. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a little bit weird.
Yeah.
But it is just because it's so prolific and it's such a middle-aged women's crutch, isn't it? And it's this
But we're doing
way to deal with midlife.
And we're doing big alcohol's job for it, because we're just promoting it and selling it on alcohol's behalf. And like, you know, Mother's Day just astonishes me. And when you look at some of the messages and you actually look at them and you think about what, like, there was a card that said, oh, I'm the reason my mum drinks wine. And oh, thanks, mum, for passing me the wine gene. Like, the evidence shows a daughter that grows up with a mother with alcohol use disorder is something like 7 times more likely to develop alcohol use disorder herself, because all she'd ever seen modeled to her as self-care is her mum drinking wine.
Yeah.
And so let's start thinking as well about what we're modeling to the next generation.
I want to ask you very quickly, briefly, because this affects a lot of women. I think it's one of the things that would encourage women to look at their alcohol use is the risk of breast cancer when you drink. Do you know what that is, you know, specifically? Because we talk about, you know, I get a lot of questions about HRT and all these other risks, but actually drinking is by far the biggest risk for breast cancer, isn't it?
Yeah, so the World Health Organization has written several statements over the last couple of years about their concern of how high the risk is. The studies now are showing 1 in 5 breast cancer diagnoses is directly caused by alcohol. And the World Health Organization has said drinking more than 2 units of alcohol a week increases your chance of developing breast cancer. So there is no safe amount of alcohol when it comes to the link between alcohol and breast cancer.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So let's get on to the positive. What are your biggest tips around how to start changing our relationship with alcohol?
Yeah, look, I think the first place to start is to really think about, why do I drink? So just to ask yourself that question. So I've got a group of 16,000 women, and I asked the question, why do you drink, or why did you drink? And Nikki, I got 3 answers, and 3 answers only: boredom, stress, and loneliness.
Wow.
And so we've got a generation of women, they're busy, but they're bored. So they're not doing things in their life that bring them joy. So if I said, like, if you'd asked me, what are your hobbies? I'd have just looked at you and gone, drinking, because that was kind of what I did for my me time, right? So we've got boredom, we've got stress, and we know the problem with stress is, as soon as the brain creates a neural pathway that says, when I feel stressed and I have a drink, it makes the stress go away. It means that you're going to just, your neural pathway is just going to fire every single time you feel stressed to remind you to have a drink. And that's, you know, the big part of the work I do with women is on the stress side. And then loneliness. Do I actually, and you could be surrounded by people but you can still feel really lonely, because if you don't get to be your true authentic self with people, and if you are having to put on an act, if you're having to amend your personality in some way to make people like you, to feel like you're accepted in a group, then you can feel very, very lonely. And so this is the heart of the work I do, is coming back to that authentic self of, well, who am I when I strip back some of these parts and the alcohol use of who am I in here? And that's just the best part of the work I do, is helping women really connect to themselves at that deeper level. So really looking at, why do I drink? Like, what are my triggers? What do I have in my life outside of work, family, all the jobs that I do in the house, drinking, and then other responsibilities, maybe caring for elderly parents or any of those things. What do I do that is for my own joy and pleasure outside of drinking? And most women I ask that question to, they don't have anything. And that's what we start to explore. Like, what hobbies might you want to go back to? What interests do you have? What do you want to start adding in? And slowly but surely, we start adding in the stuff, because you can't just take the alcohol out, because then you just leave this big gaping hole in your life if you've been using it quite significantly. So if we take the alcohol out, we have to start putting stuff in. And that's the physical stuff that I talked about earlier of, exercise, nutrition, sleep, supplements, and everything like that. But then it's also the emotional, the fulfillment, the purpose. How do I create a life that has more purpose and meaning and fulfillment to me, so I actually don't want to escape it at the end of come 5 o'clock every day?
Yeah, and surely a big part of that is also any past trauma, isn't it? Or stuff that you're trying to mask the feelings of, presumably, as well. You've got to go a bit deeper for that.
And lots comes up like that. It did for me, and I went into therapy, and it was the greatest gift I ever gave myself, was actually facing some of the stuff and then being able to heal from it, because we can't heal from what we don't address or acknowledge, but it always comes back and bites us on the arse in some way if we keep suppressing it. And so lots of the women I work with go on to do a lot of that deeper work, and it sounds like effort and it sounds hard, and it's like, who's got time for that? But then who doesn't have time for that? Because are you going to just spend the next 10 years drinking, feeling like crap, not doing stuff that brings you joy, and then where does that take you?
Yeah, amazing. So where can people find out more about you, Sarah?
Yeah, so I have a book coming out in Australia at the end of January, and in the UK at the beginning of February. And that's called Beyond Booze: How to Create a Happier Life Alcohol-Free. So I'm very excited about this book, because it's not a book on how to get sober. There's tons of books out there. It's a book about how to create your happiest life so you don't need to drink, and it's aimed purely at middle-aged women. So it's
Amazing.
Me writing a book for the version of me that needed all of those tools, and it's got so many tools and strategies in it. And then I am very present on Instagram, which is at Sarah Rusbatch, and my website has tons of free resources. It's got a free guide on there, and that's just sarahrusbatch.com.
Amazing. It's been enlightening. Thank you so much for joining me, and good luck with the book. I'll be promoting it for you too. That's amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Take care.